It's the World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us from New York City, Deputy World Editor for the Daily Beast, Noor Ibrahim. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Welcome back.
Welcome back to Borzu Dargahi, who joins us from Istanbul, international correspondent for The Independent. How are things there?
Pretty nice and cool.
Nice and cool. Okay. We're starting to get autumn weather here in the French capital, as Aisha Gul-Sert can attest. Journalist, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for your invitation.
And columnist Joseph de Weck, author of Emmanuel Macron, the Revolutionary President. Thanks for joining us again here.
Thanks for having me.
The World This Week, where you can listen, like, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine streaming services. With Russia in retreat on the battlefield, it was a Wednesday morning, 7-minute, nationally televised address where Vladimir Putin radically raised the stakes with a mobilization, annexation referendums, and threats to the West.
They are no longer hiding the fact that Russia should be defeated by all means on the battlefield and then deprived of its political, economic, cultural, and in general any kind of sovereignty, with the complete plundering of our country. I want to remind those who allow themselves such statements about Russia that our country also has a variety of weapons of destruction, and in some cases even more modern than those in NATO countries. And if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will without question use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
Borzu Dargahi, this is not a bluff.
Well, I think it probably is a bluff. I think that it's a move meant to mobilize a Russian people that is increasingly questioning his soundness to rule, and that there have been cracks. There's obviously been cracks in the elite after the recent defeats in eastern Ukraine, and this is a good way of. I think the audience is domestic. And is meant to rally the base, so to speak, as well as, in a more practical way, get some troops for his war effort as the war reaches a new fever pitch.
Well, it's certainly not a bluff is the fact that they have started rounding up fighting age men to go to the front. The evening after Putin's address, an estimated 1,300 arrests were made in protests against the mobilization in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's anyone's guess how many of those detained have directly been enrolled. But in Russia, those served their papers seem to already be going beyond reservists and former servicemen.
I got this summons, according to which today I need to present myself for revision of my military registration. Today on September 22nd, 2022. When I came in, I was given the notice according to which today at 3 p.m. I need to depart for the army. Here you are. I've never served in the army. I was never a conscript. I have no military experience. I will go. Do I have an alternative? I go today or I get criminally prosecuted.
He's never served in the army, Noor Ibrahim, and yet he's been called up. The calculus among some, pointing to history, is that Russia can perhaps change the tide by sheer numbers, even if young men like the one you just saw could be cannon fodder.
And that's exactly why this move kind of spotlights the absolute desperation that Putin is feeling right now. I mean, mobilization is a hugely unpopular concept in Russia right now. And you're seeing more than just protests at this point. There was a recruitment office that was set on fire, fights breaking out on the street. People have seen the losses and the embarrassment that Russia has been dealt with in the war. And even the troops that already are there, they're not equipped properly. They're not armed properly. So I think people are also questioning, you know, how are you going to, if we don't have the resources to to arm our 300,000 more people, then how is this going to end up well? I don't see this move boding well for Putin or Russia whatsoever.
Not seeing it bode well, and we are seeing a run for the exits. Aisha Gulsert, people heading to the borders of places like Finland, Georgia, Armenia, and your native Turkey.
Yes, indeed. But it's interesting because what Noor said, I'm not sure I agree, because the words she used is desperation and embarrassment. This is a very Western way of looking at what Russia is in a way that what is interesting, I think, in what's going on right now is that here is a Russian president who for a very long time did not want to use the word war. And actually, just like Borzou said, he's talking to the audience is domestic indeed, to say, we are the only ones in the Western who are against, the Western world is against us. We need to be united and go to the front and protect our country. But there's also an audience that's international. We saw it this week with Lavrov's speech at the United Nations General Assembly when he talked about, hey, countries, the fact that you're sending weapons to Ukraine means that you're involved in this operation, in this war, which basically he's saying to Germany, to France, and to the United States, saying, which comes back to the speech of Putin saying, be careful, we'll protect our territories, no matter what those territories are, new or old, with whatever kind of weapons we have.
Well, if it was directed towards international audience, it hasn't had that much effect. We saw the Chinese foreign minister sitting down with his Ukrainian counterpart, China, which over the last 48 hours, since those words you heard at the outset from Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly talked about the notion of territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Indeed, and India too has kind of like China backed off a little bit from its partnership, and from calling for peace. But I think that in the West, we like to think of Russia, which I'm not a pro-Putin person at all, as an isolated person. And I don't think that he is. He has other ways of continuing to do deals, whether it's with African countries, whether it's with Latin American countries. So let's not think of this as only, Europe versus Russia.
All right. The U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates this week. The economy of the planet is slowing. And oil prices are down. So that's also bad news for Vladimir Putin. But let me ask you, Josef de Vec, about this run for the exits, because here in Europe, we've seen two kinds of reactions. We've seen Finland saying they want to regulate who crosses that land border. They've got a border that's 3 hours away from St. Petersburg. And you've had the German Interior Minister on Thursday stating that all deserters will be welcome and given asylum.
Yeah, I think there's no common European line to this question, and Europeans have been divided on many issues in this war already. But on the whole, I think it is surprising the way they have managed to maintain unity. I think the speech with Putin, what is really important, it is that there is a foreign aspect to it, and he's really speaking also to a German public. We're having this debate in Germany and France whether we should send tanks. And when he's saying basically, don't cross this line and raising these threats, this nuclear fear is something that is very real in German politics, and he's playing with that. You
heard the French president who saying we're gonna be stepping up our backing of Ukraine.
Yeah. So I think there is a real foreign policy dimension to this threat as well. I also think it is a bluff because there is no red line he mentions. Basically, if you're really saying, don't do this, then you state a red line. And then it's very hard to say your bluff has been called because, you have a red line. And he didn't really state the red line. He really didn't define exactly what would be the threshold over which Russia would, use tactical nuclear weapons. So it sounds like a bluff, but it's about influencing definitely also the foreign dimension, I think.
The Kremlin certainly keeping us guessing. It's referendum day this Friday in Russian-controlled eastern Ukraine. Puppet governments there staging votes in a hurry. What's unclear there is Russia's red lines, to borrow Josef's line on this one. Is the Kremlin laying claim to parts that they control already? And by the way, according to the Ukrainians, they've lost more ground on the battlefield. or all of the administrative territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. If you look at the map, Russia does not fully 100% control any of those administrative territories. Borzu, what happens at the end of the voting next Tuesday?
It seems that there is, and I heard it from the report, this sort of fiction that this is an actual referendum, that there is sort of a process, and that there's, this is a predetermined outcome, of course, and it's not going to make, any difference really in terms of the strategy of the Ukrainian armed forces, in terms of the political strategy in Kiev, in terms of the Western strategy, what the outcome of these referendums is and what it actually means. The only thing that it could possibly mean, and I've heard this speculation a lot, is that by annexing these territories, they'll be able to recruit and gang press even more cannon fodder by declaring Ukrainians Russians and, forcing poor, kind of hapless people into the Russian armed forces in the desperate war effort.
And about the Russians that are crossing over to where you are, I guess it's just the ones who can afford those the price surge in those airline tickets.
Yeah, but I think based on what I hear and people that I've met, there's a lot of people who cobble together basically life savings. They go to their parents, they go to their uncles to get on those tickets to come to somewhere like Turkey. And it is extraordinary in Istanbul, and I hear it's the same in other certain other Turkish cities. The changing character of the city as more and more it was Russians and then Ukrainians as well, and now this fresh wave of Russians coming in here, really changing the character of Istanbul.
On the day the Russian president was warning no more Mr. Nice Guy, Russians and Ukrainians were also swapping prisoners. The Turkish and Saudi brokered deal, including those captured from the Azovstal steelworks plant in Mariupol back in the spring. On her Telegram channel, Kremlin propagandist Margarita Simeonon criticizing the swap, saying Russia had lost the information war on this one. Noor Ibrahim, two schools of thought when it comes to criticism of that prisoner swap. One is that, this is a sign of cracks within the Kremlin system. The other saying that all this is a way to sort of stage manage any opposition.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say. You even had Kadyrov come out and say he was extremely unhappy with the decision, and it's quite rare to have such a strong Putin ally just come out with that and admit it openly. But I think what people are seeing there is just, at least the ultranational Russians are seeing just the imbalance in the numbers. The fact that it was, 4 times more Ukrainians and foreigners released than actual Russians, I think was hard for people to ignore. I'm not sure what happened there behind closed doors, but if anything, I think that this is just another example of, other things happening behind the scenes that we're not completely privy to yet. And yeah, who knows? I think, there's going to be a lot more discussions about that to come.
A lot more discussions. Let me just to ask you about what's happening where you are. It's UN week, that week where you have the United Nations General Assembly opening. All the world leaders come to New York, and you get the sense that Vladimir Putin's it was a Tuesday overnight address where you are, Wednesday morning here in Europe, that it's kind of coalesced opinion against him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Biden this week made some of his strongest statements against Putin, saying that, his comments should make your blood run cold. I think, if it's not actual isolation in the way that, he might have some alliances with China or other countries, but I think the outward image right now is absolutely one of isolation. And I think it's growing more by the day with each announcement that he makes like that, with each drastic move, and with more evidence that even his own people are just, scrambling to get out of there.
I should go, sir.
If there's someone who is extremely happy right now, it's Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He tried to show to the world that he is a great negotiator and he's the only one who can do the guy who is going to be between Ukraine and Russia and bring peace. It has failed twice. In July, he had his first hit, which was about the grain import through the Black Sea.
Which he negotiated.
Again, this week, he scored, quote unquote, in the sense of he negotiated this prisoner exchange. And I think that he's really representing himself as the guy that they need in order to bring something positive out of this war. The only thing I want to say, you mentioned the United Nations General Assembly. I watched coming here a great interview that one of your colleagues did with the Saudi Arabian foreign minister at the United Nations. It was so interesting because he, for about 3 minutes, refused to say that Turkey was one of those countries. Actually, there were only two, if you don't count Russia and Ukraine, so Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and he just refused to mention Turkey in brokering this deal. So I do agree with Noor, there is something going on behind the scenes, and let's not forget, this prisoner exchange has been talked about since apparently April.
Josef de Weg?
Yeah, I think we're sort of discussing in the prisoner exchange, we're discussing people fleeing Russia because they don't want to be drafted. But I think, and we're discussing the nuclear threat, but all these things sort of seem short-term to me. What I think is ultimately Russia is a state, it has a capacity, it will recruit these 300,000 people. And these people will come in at some point onto the war field. They will be maybe inexperienced, but they will be there. And I think what it means for me is that we're entering a period where possibly everyone understands that this war can't be won by Russia, but they're just pulling in more troops in there. And if we look back at history, if we look, at Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, Afghanistan and Iraq with the US, there was after quite some period at some time, we knew that these wars couldn't really be won. But still for years, we continued to, go in there and add more troops and add more investments. And it took much more longer to get to the moment where we say it's over and we actually acknowledge it. And this is because doing it now, it's just simply not a good option for Putin to do it.
He'd lose face.
So in a sense, what worries me about what is happening this week is that I think possibly we're at a situation where, in reality, this war might last for another 3-4 years. Probably a lot of Russians realize there are no good options. The war can't be won as they wanted to win it at the beginning, but they're not willing to accept it right now, and that means it lasts long. And as we know in history, wars either are very short or long.
And how many friends will Vladimir Putin have in Italy's next government? Polls ahead of Sunday's general election give the hard-right trio of Giorgia Meloni, Matteo Salvini and Silvio Berlusconi as favorites to form the country's 70th coalition government since World War II, the first with a far-right prime minister since that war. Giorgia Meloni squarely on the side of Ukraine against Russia. But her fascist-rooted Brothers of Italy party has a proven Brussels-bashing track record.
They say that in Europe they're a bit worried about Meloni and what will happen. What will happen? The fun will be over. What will happen is that Italy will be able to defend its national interests.
So Italy first, Josef de Weg, but what does this mean when it comes to right now the conflict in Russia?
I think
Ukraine, excuse me.
Yeah. I think what is interesting, if you look at sort of the post-fascist movements in Italy in history, after World War II, they've always been quite pro-American and pro-NATO because they were anti-communist. And if Meloni now has the stance of being pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine, it's not entirely invented. There is some continuity in this history. So I don't think Meloni herself wants to change much in this, but she will be part of a all-right-wing government, and there will be Matteo Salvini, who is openly pro-Putin, has been calling also for sanctions to end. there is Berlusconi's Forza Italia. So, she will be under pressure. We will have to see on Sunday how strong she is. In a sense, the stronger she is and the weaker Salvini and Berlusconi are, the better for sort of the Ukrainian position of maintaining it. If she's weaker and the other two are stronger, then they have more leverage. But then again, I think the big conflict with Europe Rome is going to have is going to be on money. It's not going to be on Ukraine, because for Italy itself, having money is more important than having a change of position on Ukraine.
So it won't be over Ukraine. Borzu Dargahi, you agree?
I would just say that what is happening in Italy right now is a kind of a cautionary tale for a lot of Western European governments. This is their nightmare scenario. This is why they're having to play this very careful balancing act. Why you had the spectacle of Olaf Scholz going to Saudi Arabia, hand in hat, trying to get oil prices to go down. This discontent, this resurgent discontent, is very much threatening the current status quo. The inflation rates are a threat. You have big elections coming up in the West, and what is happening in Italy and what could potentially happen in Italy is something that will focus minds on trying to control those economic problems and trying to bring some kind of relief to people so that they don't vote for these extremist parties.
And you heard Joseph mention Silvio Berlusconi. Sunday's vote will mark the former prime minister's return to grace at 85. Il Cavaliere remains true to his brand and to his old friends, like Thursday evening when he defended Russia's invasion of Ukraine on Italian television.
Putin found himself in a difficult situation. Then a delegation of pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine went to him. They told him, Zelensky has increased the attacks by his forces on our borders. We have now reached 16,000 deaths. Please defend us.
Noor Ibrahim, you heard earlier Joseph de Weck talking about how it's difficult to change positions for a country that's losing a war. It seems to be difficult to change positions for Silvio Berlusconi, too.
Yeah, and I don't think this is the first time we've heard certain comments like that from Italy's far right. I think that's something that's been bubbling up for a while now. And it just goes to show how important this election is. I mean, all the things we discussed right now, Europe is vulnerable and the stakes are high. So I think, any kind of cracks and tensions that we saw, for example, in Hungary with Viktor Orban, I think there would be the same fear that that kind of scenario would play out should the election work out in Meloni's favor. And it's just a uniquely bad time for that right now. And I think that's the general atmosphere there.
Yeah, you need to take out your scorecard to figure out the Italy's hard right, because you have Matteo Salvini, who's pro-Putin, but Giorgia Meloni, who is anti-Putin for the reasons Joseph mentioned, but close to both Viktor Orban and Poland's ruling hard right party.
Giorgia Meloni is surrounded by the wrong man. Also, even not only about Berlusconi, but also what really I never thought that I would, if she were to be, if her party were to be elected, that I would mourn the day that Italy's first, the day that Italy gets a female first-time prime minister. And the thing is, this is more than far right. In her party, there are fascists. There are actual representatives who have openly said that they are in line with Mussolini. This is not just what we see only in some countries becoming more and more radical or traditional. This party in 2018 only got 4%. In a few days, they might be the winning party. There is something completely wrong going on in Europe. And before this continues to become like a huge wave, Europe needs to really move something.
And political fortunes can change fast. French newspaper Le Monde rolled back the clock just 7 years, only 7 years, to 2015, and showed us a photograph of a Giorgia Meloni, whose party, was on 4% at the time, and Marine Le Pen, invited on the same Italian talk show at the time. And now Meloni's at the gates of power. And on both sides of the Alps, you have the leaders who are pitching themselves as pragmatic conservatives who are ready to govern, but who do have inside of their parties people who are far right, very far right.
Absolutely. I mean, Meloni has, until very recently, she has promoted this idea of le grand remplacement, this idea of a big
great replacement.
Yeah, the great replacement. There is a systemic plan by George Soros, international finance, and NGOs to change the ethnic setup of Europe. So, I mean, these are the ideas that she's campaigning on, or used to campaign on. Now she has moderated her tone. What is interesting then is that if you look at the program, that she did with the other parties, there's not that much radical stuff in there. The first line of the program is basically to say, on Europe, we're going to think everything's going to be fine. We're not going to exit the euro. We're not going to exit the European Union. So there's now a lot of sort of culture war stuff going on. And this is what she's campaigning on, but there's nothing
conservative values
in these things. And I'd just like to sort of caution a bit about having a big meta narrative about Europe falling into the hands of the far right. It's just that in Italy, the swings between elections are huge. 5 years ago, 5 Star was at 30%, and now they're probably going to have 10%. And there's always, between each election, there's a huge shift, and it goes to a protest party. Usually the one that has been in opposition was Cinque Stelle back then. Now the only party in opposition is Meloni. So this is not like a huge shift of everyone being far right. It is also very much part of the Italian story of having huge electoral swings, the ones that we don't know in other European countries.
If I may just add, what I meant by this is that Europe should start asking questions when countries like Hungary, Poland, recently Sweden. Hey, a few months ago, we got scared here in France a little for Marine Le Pen as well. Or, indeed, we should not go into this fear-mongering, but there is some tectonic shift happening in Europe, and it needs to wake up to this.
Protest movements in Iran spring up when you least expect them. The death and detention of a 22-year-old woman who'd gone to the capital to visit her family, sparking a groundswell. Mahsa Amini arrested by the morality police for improperly wearing her mandatory hijab. The outrage spreading fast and even across borders, like to Istanbul.
رفت تو کما مرد. خانواده ها همه تو ایران عزادارن. یک به یک اونا با تفنگ، با شلیک، با گلوله مقابل مردم ایستادن. ولی مردم ما
Borzo Daragahi, are you surprised by this groundswell?
I mean, it was not expected to happen at this point, but I'm not totally surprised. There has been a lot of anger in Iran for a long time over the economy, over the conservative direction of the government of Ibrahim Raisi. What is extraordinary about these protests, this round of protests in Iran, and you and I have been here before over the years, over the decades at this point, is the fact that the protests are so all-encompassing. In the past, you've had protests that included the urban elite and the educated people, that did not include people from the rural areas and from the townships and from small, far-off places, and did not include, for example, ethnic minorities. Here you have an extraordinary moment where you have all these different groups, from the upper middle classes in the north of Tehran to the working classes in the labor unions and the bus drivers and the school teachers, to the Kurdish heartland, as well as to people in rural areas, men and women coming together, supporting each other. This is a very, very dangerous moment for the regime.
Mahsa Amini was Kurdish from the northwest of Iran, but Borzu, just tell us, like that image we've seen, and it's become iconic, of that woman doing that twirl before she burns her hijab, just like the images we've seen of people jumping on police cars. So those coming from, that was, I think, in the city of Amol. These are coming from the Caspian Sea region. What's going on?
People are just angry. There's a lot of frustration. You have a bunch of old clerics and kind of quasi-fascist military leaders lording over an increasingly young and restless population that is clamoring for social freedoms and economic opportunities, that is also in search of a political voice. The way that the Islamic Republic is set up, there are no opportunities for people to speak their minds, to create a political movement, or to even have a drink and dress how they want. So this is, you have a regime that's pitted against the people, and this is the result of that.
Noor Ibrahim?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that was just said. I think this is the perfect example of a government that just hasn't been able or hasn't been willing to keep up with the changes in their population, in terms of the lifestyle choices they want to make, the way they adhere to their religion. And it was bound to reach a boiling point. And, these protests in Iran have happened before. But yeah, this is special in terms of just the scale and the scope of the protests. And despite all the brutal crackdowns that are happening, people are not letting up. It's ongoing. And I think it's pretty incredible that this, one tragic story of this woman has sparked this. And now it doesn't just include women's rights, but also just other issues in Iran, like the economic situation, widespread corruption. Hopefully it'll bring about actual change.
I've heard it said that the spark was this morality police, which has people really upset. But as Noor just said, Aisha Gulserd, it's gone way beyond that in terms of basically this grievances turning to outrage.
It's usually like that, and not only in the Middle East, but in terms of it's usually one thing that is the last drop that makes it go big. But in Iran, we've seen it for a long time. We've seen it in 2019 already when the gas prices got up. We saw it in 2009 with the Green Revolution. So it's not like suddenly there was a spark and here there are people for years have been dissatisfied, discontent from, just like Borzadar just said, it was that this regime is not only telling you how to get dressed, but how to behave in your own home, how to eat, what to eat, how to dress. And this reminds me a lot, in a different way, of course, the Gezi protests we had in Turkey in 2013, in the sense of people said this was about keeping a green area in Turkey, and it has become something against the regime, the Turkish government, saying no more oppression. And what we see today in Iran, in different cities, is chants such as saying death to the dictator, no more Khomeini. And which is very interesting too, is that Iran is in a different, is soon, who's going to replace the supreme leader? There's a new president, but a new president who doesn't really have the shoulders in order to carry an opening Iran, because he's very traditionalist, and also because he has his hands in blood because of the 1988
I got cut off.
Situation. So
I got dropped off.
We will see how it goes, but I don't think it's the end.
Hello.
All right, we seem to have trouble with Borzu's connection. Borzu, we can hear you, and that's for certain. There is this sense of a bad omen. This Friday, the regime staging pro-hijab rallies across the country. There was the military with its bluntest warning yet, saying that it will confront, quote, the enemies behind the unrest. Meanwhile, the country's conservative president, you heard Aisha Gul mentioning Ibrahim Raisi, promising an investigation. He's been in New York for UN Week.
Whether there is a party at fault, it must certainly be investigated. I contacted her family, the family of the deceased, at the earliest opportunity, and I assured them personally we would continue to investigate that incident.
Yeah, I should go mentioning 2009, and there were others, by the way, between 2009 and 2019, and they all end the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one figure that really strikes me when looking at Iran is participation in presidential election. If you look about 20 years ago, 80% plus participated in these presidential elections. If you look at the last one, it was, I think, 47%. So it just shows you that a regime that for some time had some kind of democratic legitimacy, had some kind of popular support, is just massively losing it over 20 years, with a big part of the population just not believing in the system anymore. And that can't go well.
All right, and just when you thought Lebanon's economic meltdown couldn't get any worse, the country's retail banks shutting their doors this week indefinitely. They'd already been restricting withdrawals to customers, and that's what triggered the wrath of a one-woman army. Last week, a furious Salih Hafiz, brandishing a toy gun to access her family's $13,000 in savings to pay for her sister's medical bills. The 28-year-old interior designer sparked at least 6 other copycat bank robberies before the national shutdown. Speaking from the Bekaa Valley, she recalled the frustration of her repeated demands for her money.
The same bank manager who the day before wasn't paying attention to me started saying, "Whatever you want. We're in a country of mafias. If you're not a wolf, the wolves will eat you."
Noor Ibrahim, get a gun out and you get a lot more respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show you how terrible the situation in Lebanon right now and the lengths people are going to get access to their own money. And I think what is kind of the saddest part about the situation is that they're often doing it for to be able to afford just basic human necessities, medical treatment or food. You know, and I don't think it's surprising at all that you know, this woman and others like her have become sort of folk heroes right now. I think there's just a complete irreparable distrust in the government, and they feel like, you know, this is the only thing that they can do to support themselves and their families and keep life going. So it's pretty incredible.
This story is incredible. Borzu Salih Hafiz telling journalists how she, once she got the cash, taping it and pretending to be pregnant so she could fool the police, and also to get him off the trail, writing on social media that she was going to Istanbul when she wasn't. What was your reaction, though, to this story?
I mean, it's such a tragedy with Lebanon, and the fact that they have election after election and they keep electing the same corrupt thugs because of the way the system is rigged. These are people who wear very, very expensive suits and drive around in Range Rovers, but they don't really do anything for the people. They're just, you know, criminals, basically. This is a legacy of the Civil War and the system that was set up afterward, this power-sharing agreement that basically gives the warlords and their sons and daughters and nephews and nieces all the power, and has exactly zero accountability to the public. The banking disaster is sort of a continuation of the port disaster, and it's caused by the same things, just immense incompetence, immense corruption, and a ruling elite that refuses to just stand down and get out.
Yeah, last month, the World Bank tried to get the world's attention. The World Bank, which usually employs diplomatic language, but this time they issued a report that likens the country's public finances to a massive Ponzi scheme, a massive con game by the country's political elites. And let's hear again what Sally Hafiz has to say about that.
The same bank manager who the day before wasn't paying attention to me started saying, whatever you want. We're in a country of mafias. If you're not a wolf, the wolves will eat you.
All right, yeah, let's hear what she had to say.
Don't think that senior authority members in Lebanon don't have interest with the banks. They are all in cahoots to steal from us and leave us to go hungry and die slowly.
Aishagul Sir, you heard Borzu talking about that explosion at the port of Beirut. That happened after the pro-democracy or anti-corruption rallies that we had in 2019. After the port explosion, we all thought, oh, this is the game changer. This time there's going to be reform. Didn't happen.
I was in Beirut about 3 months ago, right after the elections. And what really struck me is it was my first time in Lebanon, and this is a country that we have called as the Switzerland of the Middle East. What we have seen with this video is almost like of her going into the bank is almost like a Ridley Scott movie with a Middle Eastern twist, because she's going to actually get her own money. And the thing is that all the people that I spoke with in Beirut, the Lebanese, were saying, we don't trust anymore because we can have as many elections as you want. It's the same families, it's the same people, or it's the same people's people who are running actually for the in this politics, and it's called corruption. So as long as this corruption and this, dirty politics continue, the country cannot find its light, despite the fact that the Lebanese, and Borzu would know much better than me because he lived there for a long time, are incredibly resilient people. So for us to have videos like that shows that it's really the last resort.
So I spoke to one of my Lebanese colleagues in the newsroom a short while ago. I said, how do you survive in a country where all the banks are closed? He said in Lebanon, they're used to this. They're talking about resilience. And well, you can borrow money through other ways. You go down and see a local shopkeeper. But kind of getting along with the black market isn't a way, of course, to sustain a country.
No, obviously it isn't. I mean, luckily Lebanon has a big expatriate community, and they're sending in some money, and I think some of this is upheld by money coming from abroad. But if you just look at it from an economic history perspective, the last 10, 15 years have been a complete disaster. And maybe to some extent, Lebanon has its own problems, but the hyperinflation, this is a theme that we're going to see in other countries, in Turkey, and inflation generally also in the Western world as well. It just rots a society completely.
We're out of time, Borzo Dargahi, but where can the pressure come from for there to finally be change?
I think that's a good question. It's related to Iran. Hezbollah, Iran's client in Lebanon, is not the most corrupt player, but it is the one that blocks any kind of meaningful reform, because opening up the books and having any measure of transparency would show what Hezbollah is doing and how it's moving arms on behalf of Iran. And Hezbollah will not allow real reform. So it's really Iran. Iran is not the purveyor of corruption, but it's the preventer of improvement in Lebanon.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Much more to talk about. Borzo Dargahi, thank you so much for being with us from Istanbul. Noor Ibrahim in New York City. Want to thank as well Aishagul Sert, Joseph Tevek. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.